Hi, this is Naveena again. Now I'm going to read to you from the first chapter from the very first book I read. It's called Choice of a Lifetime. Ooh, go back here. There you go. Choice of a Lifetime. It's on Amazon, and it's an ebook stand. I started this in 1989, and I think it took a year and a half to complete. And I put it on the internet first in 2001. But I'm not a very good promoter, and no copies sold. And okay, I think it's a really good book, but then I'm a little biased. So I'm just going to read the first chapter from each of my books, and if anybody's interested, they can go to Amazon or ebook stand. Ebook stand has all the hard copies. Amazon has the digital copies. Let me read the back of it. This talks about my favorite topic too, which is who we are and how we got there. Okay, so in the depths behind appearances lurk powerful yet subtle emotions. From the space between lifetimes, Lance knows he must forge his own pathway in order to achieve absolute freedom. To give himself the best opportunity, he chooses to be born into the quagmire that lies beneath middle-class American values. His road is pitted with subverted emotions, calculating manipulation, and monumental betrayals. The fabric of his life is woven between the deep psychological wounds of those closest to him and the powerful demands made by his underlying need to survive. Within this novel, we are drawn deeply into the inner world of the child and into the unconscious motivation of the adult. Freedom is seen as the releasing of the individual from the driving forces of fear and conditioning. To this end, Lance's adventurous and often humorous search leads him from the logging camps of Alaska to the fantasy land of Disney. His seeking takes him through the exciting dangers of the African bush to the exotic marvels of the East. In every place and in each situation, he must challenge everything he thinks he knows and find the courage to face the fears he never knew he had. All right, I'm just going to read half on this YouTube, and then I'll do another YouTube to get the other half. Okay. Choice of a Lifetime by Naveena Shine. Chapter 1, first part. Lance landed with a thump. After a headlong rush through the long tunnel, wind whirling around his senses, spinning head first towards the darkness, his disorientation was complete. He lay still, unable to make a move, produce a thought, or even to know which way was up. Something weird was happening in his head. There was a picture, a scene hovering, fluttering, just on the edge of his consciousness. He knew that if he could manage to focus this image, then he would have the knowledge of all things, be able to live in utter bliss, joy, and contentment. But every time he tried to reach for it, tried to clear his vision, it moved further away, tantalizing him from beyond the horizon. Each time he was left with a feeling of frustration, separation, and loss. A taste of bitterness crept in, for he knew that once he had known this state, and now it was slipping away. The memory of his sojourn in the place beyond time and space was no longer available to him. It was too late to recall the reasons for the momentous decision he had taken and now carried through. But it had been necessary. He had to return and live out one more lifetime, for he had not achieved all that he could achieve. There was a part of him that he had come here to release, something on the material plane to which he was still attached, from which he was not yet free. This attachment prevented him from being complete in himself. Although in his last few lifetimes he had achieved a very high state of consciousness, been a great teacher, and progressed on his own path, there was still something that continued to elude him. The only way he could know it was to experience it, and for that he needed to create a body through which he could again become part of the world of matter and substance, time and space. A material form through which sensations and emotions could flow, to give his spirit access to the potential of learning and change. He had no idea what needed to change, but he did know that while he was still attached, he could not merge with the whole and become one with the universal source. Putting his trust completely in his higher consciousness, he made his choice of parents, of time, of culture, and of sex. He knew that this highest source in him would create all the opportunities in life that he needed to give himself at least a chance of finding what he was holding on to. Although he would have no inkling of this during the process, he understood that whatever conditioning his mind received would manifest itself as the total opposite of what he was to learn. This was so that he could immerse himself in every aspect of the quality that he was still attached to, and encounter it in all of its rainbow colors. He had to go through it, allowing everything to be experienced before he could be done with it. Then he might be able to leave it behind and enter into his final enlightenment. But there was a terrible danger that he would fail. Already he had lived thousands of lifetimes working on a myriad aspects of himself, and he still had no inkling of what he was to look for. This attachment was so much a part of him that he could not see it as separate, and it would take drastic action on his part to sever it from his being. He could so easily go through this life too, and never see what was chaining him to the material form. Worse still, he might regress to a lower state of consciousness, from which the climb back would be arduous. No, that mustn't happen. He determined that in this lifetime he would risk everything for the search. He would endure all he needed to endure, and by putting himself totally into this prison, he hoped that he would finally be able to see his chains and find the courage to break them. To this end, he condensed his spirit into form, entered the womb, and was now wondering what on earth had happened. He made another lunge at the mirage of his previous existence, and by putting such desperation into his efforts to recapture it, there was no longer anything left to reach for. The state of harmony, awareness, and relative freedom that had been his reality just a few moments before had disappeared from his now human consciousness. This would be until such time as he could once more make them his own, maybe this time forever. He lay there for a long time, without sensibilities or desire. There was nothing happening in the whole of his universe. He slept a long sleep. The womb that enfolded him gave him its warmth, shared with him its sustenance, and imparted into his rapidly changing form its own steady, rhythmic pulsations of life. He dimly discerned the shapes that his body was taking. The amoeba was blending into the fish, melting into the mammal, merging with the ape. His whole form was moving into the blueprint of arms, legs, head, shoulders, chest, hips, genitals, torso that was specific to the humankind. Each gene moved along its chosen pathway to give his body its 6-foot potential. Blonde curly hair, huge brown eyes, healthy, robust, silky white skin that would tan bronze in the sun. Beneath the skin, he was aware of the formation of the machinery that would support, maintain, and sometimes dominate the form that this being had chosen. He saw the chemistry that would determine where his trigger points would be, his thresholds of anger and pain, joy and love, fear and bliss. Shockwaves from the outside world sometimes intruded and make their effect upon the whole, usually reflecting moments of extreme passion within the body of his mother. The tremulation of orgasm was harmonious to his being, while the vibrations of the deep bass of his father's voice, accompanied by trembling in her system, was somehow disturbing. The occasions when his mother felt exhaustion probably had the most devastating effect on him, as during these times he would not have any reserves of energy to draw from, and the whole work of creation was slowed down. But for the most part, he lay in his own dynamic world, knowing nothing of the outside. It was warm, cozy, and dark, with no tension beyond that of growth, and no anxiety or worry to deflect his energy from the construction of perfection. In those few short months was built the foundation upon which the consciousness of Lance would be able to work, the raw material through which he would fashion the life which he had chosen for himself in another dimension. It was now time for the design to begin unfolding. Oh, what is this? What's going on? The walls are caving in. I'm being squeezed. I'm being crushed to death. I'm not going to live. What's happening? Lance's first encounter with fear was excruciating. On a physical level, he felt the capsule around him contract so that pressure built up, pinioning his arms close to his sides. It pressed his head until he imagined it caving in, fragmenting into a million pieces. His chest constricted until he could feel his heartbeat reverberating within the hollows of his ribcage, thumping as the blood pulsated wildly through his ears. Fear, an intense, mindless energy that in one wild moment became his whole existence. The primeval biological reaction of an organism facing its own extinction, deeper than thought, stronger than emotion. No! A cry emitted from the soul, from the essence of his being, directly to the life source itself, imploring, helpless, terrified, a victim of incomprehensible horrors. Help me! The agony receded. His cry had been heard. Mercy had been given. Lance was no longer master of his own destiny. The coincidental juxtaposition of cause and effect had bonded in him a belief in his own helplessness, and the belief that salvation came from the outside. He had seen that it was possible to ask for and get succor in his greatest need, and therefore there must be something greater than him which had power over his life and death. His first erroneous deduction had been made. While everything around him returned to the equilibrium that had previously been his life, it was clear that things were not quite the same. There was uneasiness and apprehension, where before there had been calmness and tranquillity. Lance viewed his surroundings with an awareness that had not previously been there. He began to take note of the warmth, the comfort, the sensations of his body, not as if he were part of the whole experience, but as if he were now separate from them, observing them. He was able to distinguish between himself and the warm liquid encasing him. The experience interested him, and he extended his arms, testing the sensations of movement and flow. He sensed a change in the atmosphere, a subtle release of pressure, as if a dam had burst somewhere far away, and he suddenly felt free to expand. Just as he was reaching out to explore this new dimension, the next wave hit. This was different from the first. Instead of crushing him so totally, he felt himself being squeezed all around and edged forward headfirst to a narrow passageway. With a new sense of mobility, he began to push desperately at the walls of his confines, hopelessly trying to prevent them from crushing the life out of him. Fear was different too. Although it was as intense as the first, it was not quite so pure. He knew that he could cry for help from the bottom of his soul, and it would come. He had found his first way of trying to control his universe. The scream was long and soundless, and help was not immediate. "It's not working. I'm not doing it right. I'm not going to be helped. I'm really going to die. Help!" The pain subsided. "Thank goodness I'm saved again." With the onset of pain, time began to take on shape and meaning in Lance's life. Before, there had been a continuous isness, as if there were no beginning and no end to the moment he was living. Now, his placid existence began to be broken up by periods when the pain and suffocation were his only reality. He feared each moment that this would be his last. Then there were periods when he was able to relax and take stock of what was happening to his body. Now that he knew what to do, the fear was not as debilitating as it had been. He was never absolutely sure when he would be helped, or sometimes during a particularly long and painful episode, even if he would be helped. But seeing as he was not actually dead yet, there was room for a little hope. As his confidence in his survival grew, so did something else in equal proportion. Anger. How dare he be subjected to such a terrifying ordeal? All this horror was being inflicted on him without rhyme or reason, and he could see no end to it, no rationality for it. He was totally helpless against it. He just had to endure, and it might not ever stop. Why? Why? Without an answer, anger dissolved into self-pity and resentment, which smouldered beneath the intensity of the sensations. After one particularly bad episode, he sensed that something was moving up ahead. His head felt different, as if it were moving into a space where the walls were no longer pressing down around him. Lance felt the pressure released, and he was propelled forward into something for which his complete experience of life so far had not come close to preparing him. End of the first section of chapter 1.